Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tunnel Vision, a show brought to you by USCFootball.com. I'm your host, Jack Smith, joined in studio by Ryan Abraham and Chris Trevino. We're going to recap USC's 43-42 heartbreaking loss down in Salt Lake City against the Utah Utes. Guys, what a great college football game. I'm happy to be here, back talking USC football with you guys. Both of you went down to Salt Lake City. Tough loss for the Trojans. We're going to be recapping it here tonight.
Yeah, it's going to be should be a fun show. We're going to do some live calls, so if you want to call in, 512-4TUNNEL. We're going to try to keep this one to an hour if we can. That'd be great. We are live on YouTube, so you can put your comments in the YouTube chat room, and Jack can pull them up there. If you have a question, put question. Jack can put them up at the screen a little bit later on in the show. We are still not live on Facebook yet. We've had some technical issues with that, so sorry about that, but we are live on Twitter as well. But Chris and I both flew back from the SLC today. We were up
much
late.
Earlier than you.
You were at the airport really early. Chris did a Helium Boys podcast with Shotgun Spratling, who was also there this weekend. I did my first Twitter Spaces in the Salt Lake City airport. No emergency podcast. USC 6-1. You know, it's not sky is falling. It's not the end of the world.
They didn't get dog walked by Utah. They lost by 1 in the final minute.
Yeah.
So close game.
USC wasn't trailing in the game until there was seconds left on the clock. So this is, if you're going to look at losses, this is about as ideal of one as you could get. One at the beginning of the season you would have penciled in as a loss. But Jack and I were talking before, should have changed the goalpost a little bit when USC comes out of the gate 6-0 and looking really good. I was really impressed with the way the offense came out, scoring touchdowns on the first 3 drives. Obviously the defense was ferocious is a word we use on the podcast of champions. Horrendous and atrocious. Ferocious. They were ferocious. But yes, so I mean, but if you're going to look at the grand scheme of things, to go from a 4-8 team to 6-1 team at the break with 3 very winnable games on the schedule: Arizona, Colorado, and Cal, and then UCLA and Notre Dame. And Notre Dame just lost to a Stanford team that's really terrible. This is looking up. I mean, 9-3 I think would be the basement for this season, and 10-2 seems very achievable, and even like an 11-1 type of run, which is from 4-8. That's a huge improvement. So I wouldn't say sky is falling after this one. You know, as far as losses go, I don't know. You couldn't have like drawn up like how do you want to lose. Like this is probably how you would draw it up.
Yeah, I mean, you never want to lose a game, but yes,
No.
it's like the best loss you could have taken. Just a last second, a game you sort of led the entire time in Rice-Eccles, a place that is a SOB to play in, and leave with a win in. You know, only 1 loss with fans in the stands over the last 4 years. And I've seen a lot of USC fans on my Twitter and on the boards. You know, some of them have taken, you know, that sort of glass half full mentality where it's like, hey, this was supposed to be a loss when the schedule came out. Year 1 of Lincoln Riley, obviously Lincoln Riley has set the standard and the expectations so high for year 1, and they were matching that. And as you said, the goalposts got moved going into this game as a 6-0 team, as a team firmly in the top 10. But this team very easily could have had 1 loss going into this game, that Oregon State game. You know, they escaped the jaws of Corvallis with that win. So the goalposts could have been right where they started at the start of the season if they did not come out of there with a win against the Oregon State Beavers. But there they were, 6-0, still an underdog in this game because, as we know, Rice-Eccles, tough place to play. Great environment, and probably the last time USC will play there. They had a blackout going.
Yeah.
But I've also seen USC fans that are just like, the season is over. Lincoln Riley is Clay Helton. You guys are dumb.
You don't deserve Lincoln Riley.
I just like, you guys are dumb. And there's probably some in
Call
the
it like
chat
it is,
right now.
Chris, yeah.
I'm just calling it like it is because you guys are dumb. And I thought going to the show I was going to make this point. I thought I was going to sugarcoat it, but no, you guys are dumb, and you guys don't deserve what this team has put forth so far. Yes, the defense struggled. Caleb Williams was awesome. The offense was awesome at times. And you said the word, what was it, atrocious? Ferocious. But I just want to say, if a certain penalty doesn't go USC's way, they shut them out on 3 consecutive drives to start that game, get a pick, and possibly drive down and take a 21-0 lead. So the game ended for them ferocious, but they started off really, really well in this game. Probably the best start you could have asked for from both sides of the ball. And if USC takes that interception, there's no flag, and I'm sure we're going to talk about penalties. But if there's no penalty there, USC drives down and makes a 21-0, completely takes the fans out of this one. Who knows what happens? Who knows how many points that defense gives up when it has that swagger and it has the blueprint, which is get up early, make a team have to pass on you or try to pick up chunk plays throughout I know it's still the first half, but, put them in a little bit of a pressure situation where, this is a team that's, we know, good at getting turnovers. So who knows what would happen if that interception stands and what USC's offense is able to do with it. Maybe we're not talking about how bad the defense was, how amazing Dalton Kincaid was in that game. But I don't know. This game was a coin flip, essentially, where a lot of things could have gone either way, and I think there were multiple ways USC leaves that game with a win. But it's a 1-point loss. Season is not over. Clay Helton and Lincoln Riley are not the same. And, yeah, there's a lot to build on. They have the bye week. They need a lot of things they need to readjust, reassess, take the emotions of this loss and channel it into finishing out the season strong. And as we knew, the back half of the schedule sets up very nicely for them. Obviously, that UCLA game is going to be a big one, but USC still very much in the hunt for a Pac-12 championship and whatever happens after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's no moral victories in college football. Obviously, it's tough anytime you lose. But then again, if you said going into the bye week, USC was going to be 6-1, a year removed from being 4-8, I think everyone sitting here would have expected that and say, like, yeah, that makes sense, and that might actually be on the good side of the spectrum for the range of possibilities that could have happened. I know for these shows we normally start on one side of the ball and then flip to the other. I think for a game like this where there were so many key moments, let's start from the beginning and go to the end. Starting from the start, USC gets the ball first. They take it all the way. Caleb Williams with a big run, then Travis Dye with a touchdown. Then the defense gets a stop, another USC touchdown. You look up, USC, after starting slow in some of their games, were up 14-0 on Utah at home and looked dominant.
Yeah, I was looking at this game, and I thought, I picked USC in this one. They did cover the spread because they, only lost by 1. But I thought they were going to win, and I thought there was a good chance that they were going to win by a couple of touchdowns. And it was looking like that early on, where I just felt like USC learned something, because we were there in Corvallis, and it just looked like, man, the offense was not ready to handle a tough environment. And this was going to be an even tougher environment. Plus, there was the emotional aspects. The number 22. It wasn't a whiteout.
Painted jerseys.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot. Like, if you remember, like the Stanford game, like Stanford threw a lot into that game, like new offense, all this stuff. They kind of threw the kitchen sink at USC, and USC still blew them out. This was a thing too, where I think Utah threw a lot at USC, and USC was essentially able to take the crowd out of the game. And you mentioned that should have been an interception that wasn't. 21-0. I don't know if they're coming back from that, but keeping it within 2 scores all the time, that was giving Utah some chances and everything. So, but yeah, coming out of the gate like that, Jack, that was the key I was looking for. And even the previous game, like, what were they going to do? Were they going to come out and score on the first drive? And they did. And this one, scoring your first 3 drives has sort of been, I think, 4 or 5 of the 5 of the 7 games, USC scored the first 3 times they've had the ball. Stanford, they scored like 5 times in a row, but Oregon State, they didn't. And then I think it was maybe Washington State, maybe they scored once, but not.
Yeah.
So to come out against the Utah team, I mean, it didn't look like they were getting a lot of resistance, but Lincoln Riley talked about this afterwards. There was a lot of things you had to kind of overcome in this game. Officiating was one, the environment, all that kind of stuff. But the the initial what I saw was positive because they came out and were scoring, and they didn't look like the noise was going to impact them that much. Where, yes, you're going to get a false start every once in a while, but there was, and they were even changing plays at the line. I thought they did it a lot, and I was like, man, I don't think you want to be doing that, but it was working.
It looked completely different from what we saw at Corvallis, where it was like they were trying to change a play with like 5 seconds left. Here, they had like an extra, at least 6 seconds to get a play in, and they looked so much more comfortable.
Yeah.
Caleb Williams looked so much more comfortable.
It still looked a little bit like a fire drill because you're like, it's a crazy environment, but they were doing it earlier in the snap count, and I think that's maybe one of the things they corrected from anyway, I thought they were going to do better against the noise. They did. The fact that the offense was like clicking and moving and they were scoring, you felt really good about this. I mean, the way they played, I think if you come out and play this game like 10 times, you're probably going to win 8 or 9 of them. I mean, a lot of things had to go wrong for USC to kind of lose this game the way they were playing.
And some things did go wrong.
Lots of things.
Lots of things. And you're right. You picked USC. I picked Utah. They didn't cover, obviously. So
no.
I get the glory of picking Utah, but I don't even get the point for it. So congratulations, you're in first place.
First place in the Pick'ems.
But you were confident they were going to be able to handle the noise better this time. I thought they would too, but I wasn't like as sure as you. I was like, I don't know. Rice-Eccles, super loud, so much emotion. I did not know how they was going to handle it. And then right out the bat, early on, I saw like, okay, this team prepped much better than Corvallis. They learned a lot from that environment and that situation, and they took that and they applied it because that's good coaching.
Yep.
And you saw a completely different offense in Salt Lake City, and they were just going from that first 55-yard run by Caleb Williams. It was like, okay, Caleb came to play. This offense came to play. I even tweeted it. The offense came to Salt Lake City to play, and the defense essentially came a little bit early too until that flag, and then sort of everything kind of changed.
Yeah, that did change a lot. And I don't know. We can talk about the officiating. I was messaging with some other more national sports writers kind of about the game, but if you were listening to different recaps, like I was listening to the Audible, and the officiating came up. There wasn't they weren't saying that it was like biased against USC. They were saying it was terrible. And my feeling when I was in the press box, and I said this on the Twitter Spaces, was it felt like there was some sort of, it was like going against USC. I think there were incompetent calls, like the Pac-12, on both sides. I was talking to John Canzano, who does a great job covering the Pac-12, and the way he described it was the referees sort of talked themselves in circles, like they kind of got themselves into trouble by trying to talk through things, and they kept talking and talking. You're like, where are you going with this? Like they were too involved, which was a huge problem. There were really terrible calls, even when USC getting extra time on that final drive. I know Utah fans were complaining about that. It didn't end up in any points, but yes, that was a problem too. The biggest issue was that USC was really having a hard time getting stops, and twice when they did get stops, one of them being an interception, like literally taking the ball away, not even a chance for a field goal, the referees took that away. So they were more damaging. There were missed holding calls, like all over. People are, there was missed holding call here.
Holding happens on every
play. Like you could call that all over the place. Someone sent me a picture of holding on Cam Rising's game-winning touchdown run. Like there was being held. Like yes, like there. If you're going to say, well, there could have been holding, well, everyone you say that USC held, you could find a Utah one. These are, negating a play that already happened. That was an interception. I get it. Like the plays that went against USC were the most devastating, leading directly to 14 points for Utah. I don't think this was a Pac-12 job where they're trying to screw over USC. I mean, there was part of me that felt like that could have been a thing, and I know a lot of USC fans do. I just think it was incompetent that sort of didn't go. There's always been incompetence. But if you watch, and I think Kegs and Eggs had a funny tweet about something like, I know every conference complains about their officials and they all suck, but there's something about the Pac-12 officials, it seems like they're on acid all the time, or something like paraphrasing what he was saying. So there is definitely a national, when people are talking about this game nationally, they're talking about how bad the officiating was. I don't know if anything's going to happen. Probably not. I've talked to some of the Pac-12 guys. What's going to happen when UCLA goes to Oregon? Are they going to get the same sort of treatment or whatever? The LA schools that are leaving is a Pac-12. I'm curious. UCLA might get better treatment because they might be like, look, we can't do this again to LA school, it's going to look bad, So I'm curious to see what happens when USC's on the bye week. But yes, the officiating was atrocious. I think the problem is that the officiating took over the game, which isn't what you want when you have two ranked teams playing each other. The only two ranked teams in the Pac-12 playing each other that weekend. You don't want the officiating dominating everything, and it did impact the outcome. So you don't want that. And I know, Lincoln Riley said, the officiating was poor, but we should have still won the game. I agree with that. USC could have done 10 things in their power. Like you fix one thing, one of 10 that they have control over. They could have done better or done, one play, right? They win the game. So there was a lot of ways USC could have done it themselves, but the way the officials did it also changed the outcome of the game too. So that's unfortunate, but that's kind of life in the Pac-12, and that's part of the reason why you're leaving.
That's their really big mistake, was putting it in the hands of the ref to be the ones to decide the outcome for them.
Yeah.
And not putting in their hands to execute on this or execute on that. And like you said, if there's one thing they execute here or there, they win this game and they leave there with the win. So it was taking it out of their own hands and control and putting it into the hands of the ref. And that's what you never want. I think we asked, Figueroa about this after. We said, and he gave a pretty straight answers, quick answers, like never should have been in position for them to make that call. Like don't give them the opportunity to make that call. And that was kind of the message that he had. And yeah, it sucks for USC fans that's kind of one of the main storylines we're talking about. But we've seen this comment a lot, is especially on Saturday night, was in all my mentions, I'm sure in yours, is like, I'm so happy we're leaving this trash conference.
Yes.
Or I'm so happy we're getting away from the Pac-12 officiating. But I just want to make a point. There is still bad officiating in every conference.
Right. I think the one thing is you watch like the Tennessee Alabama game was, taking all the headlines. I mean, that was a huge game. There's different. The officiating is different. Enough, like they let
them play.
Targeting go. Like they were like that should have been targeting. Like, I mean, they wouldn't have called the ones that went against USC, but they wouldn't have called even worse ones. So I would rather see less flags than more. And a lot of times you look at, well, that does look like PI. And that, yes, if you want to call, I just don't think you want to call everything. And the Pac-12 does that, and then some. And I think you want to get away from it because the games end up being ruled by officials and not by the players on the field. Alabama had like 130 yards in penalties in that game. They had a whole bunch.
The Alabama fans are just as angry as USC fans.
They didn't like the way that was going. Yeah, but usually you're not seeing Alabama get. I don't know if they got jobbed. I didn't get to watch that too closely, but you don't usually see that. They're not. They're kind of protecting the brands. Unfortunately, and this goes back. I mean, if the Pete Carroll era, there were years which like you talk to like people that were statistical, experts. There was a couple of years where USC was not only the most penalized team, so they're the best team. They were dominating. They were the most penalized team, and every one of USC's opponents were the least penalized team. And you'll talk to people that know statistics, like that's a statistical impossibility. That is the referees trying to even things out a little bit. Like we're not going to call Arizona for holding because USC's too good. Like that kind of stuff was going on. I don't know if that's going on now, but that definitely. There was numbers to prove it back then. I don't know about this. This just seems like more incompetence than anything, and that's just the way the Pac-12 is. I like George Kliavkoff. He mentioned a lot of the Pac-12 problems coming in, and was taking them all head on. The one thing he didn't embrace was like the officiating is crap. He didn't come out and say, you know what, our officiating has been terrible. Everyone's been talking about it. There's memes all over Twitter. He didn't embrace that. Like he didn't embrace that as one of the problems when we were talking to him. So. I don't know if he will now, if it's just one of those things, but I thought the Pac-12 refereeing would get better. They would at least hey, back off, don't call everything. They're still calling everything.
And we're seeing all across football, whether it's college football level, Pac-12, or out of the Pac-12, or even in the NFL, that roughing the passer is the one that referees just don't know how to do. I mean, it seems like time a quarterback gets hit, it's been roughing the passer, whether it's Tom Brady or it's Cam Rising. So that one is difficult. I think the thing that separates the Pac-12 refs is all the other incompetence. They never know how to set the clock. The chains are wrong. They don't know how much time to add back. There's just a lot of stuff that's like, this stuff doesn't happen. The third quarter doesn't need to take an hour and a half because each play there's a flag, and each play you're resetting the clock and trying to figure out what down it is and trying to remember the rules. Is like, that's where the incompetence 2 weeks in a row almost has kind of rung true to me, is that there's things that shouldn't be happening. Hiccups in the game that give teams time to think or makes the game just take even longer. It's like this doesn't happen when it's Alabama, Tennessee. Like the game does not take this long because of the officials talking.
Shotgun pointed out just a funny note, and he talked about it in our Helium Boys podcast, that every time I guess it was the white cap that would review plays, he would put on glasses.
Yes, that was funny.
And then he would take them off when he would ref in the field. So does that mean he was blind out in the field? No, it likely means that
he's nearsighted,
nearsighted
or
or
whatever.
But still a funny image.
Yeah,
that goes perfectly with the Pac-12 officiating. Refdom.
Yeah, and that was a good point, Jack, that it's just like when you don't know what this procedure is and you're stopping plays, like I don't even know what was going on. USC's trying to drive at the end and they throw, you throw an interception and there's PI. Okay, the interception comes back, but the play continues on and there was only 8 seconds left. And I'm looking, one of the reporters next to me, I'm like, there's only 8 seconds left. Like the 15 yard doesn't matter. Like that's a good play. If you're Utah, you intercept the ball and run all over the place and waste the time. You don't get the time back. They don't take the play away. At least my understanding of it. And they were like, well, they stopped the play with a timeout in the middle. Like there was just stuff that like, that doesn't make any sense. That didn't have impact on the game because USC didn't score. But there was stuff like that just shows like they don't know what they're doing. The way, they're coming out and they're reviewing this and calling targeting for everything. And it's a lot. And I wish the Pac-12 would do something about it. I was hopeful that they would going in the season. They still haven't. So if you're a USC or UCLA fan, you're like, all right, we can leave this clown show, and you guys figure it out later on. And you can complain about Big Ten refs, but you just don't see as many flags in Big Ten games And I think for your team like USC, when you're more talented, you'd rather just let the players play. And if there's a PI that doesn't get called, or a hold that doesn't get called, or a roughing the passer that doesn't get called, that's better for you than if they're just calling everything, which kind of like evens things out sometimes. And Utah had 2 yards of penalties in the first half, so that was one of the things. They weren't getting flags. Was there never any holding? Was there never any PI, anything like that? I mean, I doubt it, but they weren't throwing any flags against the Utes, and I know USC fans kind of noticed that. And then it got even, they were throwing more flags in the second half, but it obviously got worse with the way they were calling it and kind of taking some of the plays from USC away.
Quick side question: do you think Lincoln's going to get fined?
I don't know the rules. I need to go look, but I would think so. I don't think you could openly say and I thought he did it. I thought he did it as good as you could do it, and he can afford the fine. But he made his point. Like the refereeing was poor, like the officiating was poor, but that's not why we lost. And that was a good way to put it.
At probably like in the fourth quarter, he had like an intern go run and get money out of the ATM, give him his card like here. I got it. I would have just put it on the table and then just went off. And that was the coach speak for saying the refs effing sucked.
Yes.
That was the nicest way, like you said, the nicest way you could have put it. But that was coach speak for like, you guys effing suck.
Yeah. I think you'd say at the one end, it was they were highly incompetent. Like that's where you probably are living. Could you push it to there was a bias and there was an effort to thwart USC? I mean, what I said on the Twitter Spaces is you have to give the officials more credit than if they were going to be biased, if they were going to try to impact the outcome of the game, that takes a certain level of skill. Like you would have to be good at your job, which we know that they are not. So I think you're giving the referees a lot of credit if you think that they were actually trying to help one team over the other. Because I think the level of incompetence it was like, it's just, I don't think they're good enough to be able to do that. It would take some effort and some skill to be able to try to, steer the outcome of the game one way or another.
Well, and Lincoln Riley wasn't wrong. I mean, we've been talking about officiating for a while, and it's the topic that I think SC fans are going to talk about for a while because they're now 6-1, not 7-0, and a lot of people think that officiating was the reason why. There were other reasons. USC couldn't cover Dalton Kincaid. USC didn't really play much defense. They stopped the run well, but they couldn't tackle Cam Rising. They couldn't make plays. They couldn't get a pass rush with no sacks despite coming into the game leading the nation in sacks. So maybe we can get into that because officiating was, a big reason why USC wasn't able to get out to as big of a lead, and there were some moments where it gave Utah some breath, but at the same time, it's not the only reason that USC lost to Utah last night.
No, you mentioned like Dalton Kincaid is like the second best tight end on Utah's roster. Like Brent Keefe was the best one. He's out with an injury. Kincaid, they ended up amending. He was catching passes today which is crazy when you think about it. Like the game was over yesterday, he's still catching passes. They amended his stats, so they somehow screwed up and didn't give him his 16th catch. But 16 catches, Pac-12 record for tight ends, 200, I believe, 34 or 237 yards, something like that. They made an amendment. He had 16 targets and caught every single one, 16 catches.
It's insane.
Over 230 yards, a touchdown, over 100 yards running after the catch. And, Lincoln Riley was asked about it, and, so they tried some different coverages. He said that this was their worst tackling game, which I would agree with. They gave up too much. But, man, you can't let 16 balls go to the tight end and let him catch every one of them. At some point, you just have to say, I don't give a crap whoever hurts me, I am not letting him. He's not stopping. We're not letting him catch the ball on this one. You got to do something. And I don't agree with what he was saying. We didn't get to talk to Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator. I'm sure he's not really happy about this one. But yeah, that was one of those things where you cannot let a tight end go for, that's like a half a season's worth of production for a tight end, and it was in one evening in Salt Lake City.
16 for 234 is probably more from Kincaid in one night than maybe it's definitely more than every tight end on the USC's roster right now.
Through 7 games.
Through 7 games, and probably the last 5 years, if you just added up all the tight end receptions and catches for USC tight ends, it's probably beats all those over a 12-game season.
Yeah.
That's how ridiculous that. Yeah, and
he's like Travis Kelce.
Right. At that point, it was like, just give him the Mackey Award after this. Just give him the
call it the Kincaid Award after that. Like, you can't, that's something that's in your control. I'd rather talk about that because that is god awful. That's just terrible. You cannot let something like that happen. And
it wasn't even like giant plays down the field. It was just like he was cutting him up with like little dinks over the middle for like 8 yards, 10 yards, 12 yards.
He had a 30-yarder. That was the longest one. You had 230-something yards, and your longest catch was 30. Think about that. There's no 75-yarder in there. There's none of that.
And 100 plus after the catch. I mean, It seemed like, especially against Utah, a team that didn't have a lot of weapons. It was Vele and it was Kincaid. You kind of knew that was going to happen. They didn't even try and run the ball. So it kind of just seemed like they were only going to do one thing. And the entire game, they had their way with it. They had every little dink and dunk pass they wanted. They had that one deep ball when Kalen Bullock misplayed the deep post. But other than that, it didn't seem like USC's defense was creeping up to cover Kincaid. It didn't seem like there were a whole ton of adjustments. I mean, you guys were there. I was just watching on TV, but it didn't seem like there were a lot of adjustments coming from Alex Grinch and the USC defense because every time Kincaid could spot up, he had a kind of a perfect release off the line every time, wasn't getting chipped or hit by an edge rusher. And there weren't 2 guys on him. It just seemed like every time that they wanted to throw to Kincaid, he was able to settle there for 5 yards, and USC couldn't tackle him after that. So I was surprised that they really didn't make very many adjustments, as it seemed from my viewing. I was just a little surprised by that.
I think when you're living by the big play on defense and you're not getting them, you're going to have problems. I think the one tackle for loss was in the first quarter, and it might have been on one of the drives that didn't result in points. I don't remember. I have to go back and look, but when Utah does not have a lot of penalties, 2 yards of penalties in the first half alone, and only one tackle for a loss, you're never behind the sticks. You're never going to be. So you can take something away. You weren't really taking much away. They did a pretty good job, stopping the run. That's good. I mean, that was a big improvement. But, man, they just were letting too many, guys get open in the flat or wherever, and then not being able to bring the noise and tackle them and stop the play. So I think not forcing those negative plays that you were sort of relying on changes the outlook of everything, and it allows, when we saw Washington State get their 2 touchdown drives, those were drives where USC wasn't getting the pressure, they weren't getting the tackles for loss, and Washington State was able to pick up 6, 7, 8 yards on first down, and that's going to help you move the chain. And this was what Utah was doing all night. When you're never getting those negative plays, you couldn't get them behind the sticks, and that it showed. And USC didn't show the ability to get the stop if they weren't mixing in some sacks or some big tackles for loss in some of those drives.
And I would give a little bit of credit to Cameron Rising too. It's a veteran quarterback. He was getting the ball out quick, so it wasn't like the USC pass rush had much of a chance. Tulitu Pelotu or Nick Figueroa or any of those guys to really kind of get him. And he's a mobile quarterback, so we can get out of there. We knew that coming in, and I believe he had 3 rushing touchdowns in this game. So, his mobility obviously helps when you're going up against a good pass rushing team, but just no consistency in terms of getting to him or making him feel that uncomfortable. And like I said, just be able to get the ball out quick. 86 right there. Dink him down, get him the ball, and just move the chains. Whenever they needed it, was going to Dalton Kincaid. It just seemed like there was a lot of cushion for him, and just like anyone that tried to cover him, just like he was just wide open every time. And I was talking to this about shotguns, like maybe they tried to throw somebody else in there on him. Maybe I was thinking more like Latrell McCutcheon, kind of a longer cornerback. I know Rajon Davis, he's young, but that guy plays like a safety, and he's very good in coverage. Maybe they could have gone to him, but it's obviously a tough environment on the road in a tight game. How much you really want to throw in a young guy like that. So they was just in a tough spot to try to figure out how to do anything. And when we talk to Grinch, we're going to have to ask him about he's probably going to have nightmares about Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah, I mean, how could you not? USC fans will. Cameron Rising did have no sacks, but he had 11 runs for 60 yards and 3 touchdowns. And we haven't mentioned like Caleb Williams. He was a Superman in this one. He's credited with 8 carries. He gained 97 yards. He had a 55-yarder in the first quarter. That was amazing. He had 97 yards gained. Now, he lost 40 of those on sacks. There was like a 20-yard sack and then a couple other ones. Sacked 4 times, right? Yeah. So, but he actually ran he almost had 100-yard rushing just when he was running the ball, which is pretty impressive. 381 yards passing, 5 touchdowns through the air. Some, couple of spin moves. He hit that circle button or whatever it was, and
beautiful.
It was crazy some of the stuff he was able to do. The lofted pass to Mario Williams over the shoulder. Like there was some
Willie Mays catch.
Amazing plays by Caleb Williams. And he was so emotional after the game and so much heart. And I think the team, the players themselves showed a ton of that. So I just want to make sure we mention Caleb Williams because he was an absolute warrior out there. You had Jordan Addison go over 100 yards. Mario Williams go over 100 yards. They didn't get enough carries for Travis Dye for sure. But, when you get 500-something yards of offense and score 42 points, like I'm not going to nitpick what you didn't do right on offense. The defensive problem, that's the problem was on the defensive side of the ball. But, yeah, Caleb Williams, absolute baller out there.
That's why I was saying, it's a 1-point loss in a game USC was favored to lose. I definitely came away with a lot of positive, I guess, takeaways from the game for USC, where they weren't as influenced by a tough road environment. They did come out strong and had energy from the start. The offense, it pretty much played perfectly. They went 0 for 2 on 4th down. They weren't able to capitalize on a turnover that Eric Gentry forced to. We haven't even mentioned the fact that he went down with an injury, which definitely didn't help USC when Cam Rising and Dalton Kincaid were going off. But Caleb Williams, I thought, played his best game of the season, 5 touchdowns through the air. He had, 360-something yards with 100 on the ground. So I think Caleb Williams was at his best. Jordan Addison was very good before he went down with an unfortunate injury. Mario Williams at his best. You got Josh Follow with 2 touchdowns. Michael Jackson getting in the game. He has a touchdown. I have no questions about this offense. If you put up 40 points, you should win, which is why I think, we've been talking about the defense so much because USC did put up 42 and they did end up losing.
Yeah. Props to Kyron Hudson, who had a nice touchdown. Michael Jackson's touchdown was great. I think there was a 3rd and 8, and most of that was yards after the catch. You're like, Michael Jackson just caught a touchdown in a key moment in the game. That's great. And then Josh Follow with a couple of them. I think one was the spin that he found him in the back of the end zone, I believe so. Or maybe that was Hudson. And then the other one kind of lofted it up and let him run all the way in. That was pretty cool. So, some great – you'd love to see that. You love to see the contributions from guys that maybe don't do as much. Last time Follow caught a pass was in 2019. So
Shotgun asked about that at the end of the press conference, ended kind of on a high note. And Caleb was the first to jump in. The question was for Lincoln, but he was like, it was great. It was awesome. And they gave a lot of love to those guys to see guys step up. And, again, that's coaching, Ryan. That's guys stepping up, making plays when other people go down or where you need somebody to make a play. And, if, USC closes out that game, we're here talking about Michael Jackson and just that moment for him because that's a guy who was injured for most of the season in camp and such and recently came back within the last month and has been kind of a special teams guy, did a couple of punts, but hasn't really done anything. But to be in that position and make that play in that moment, the biggest catch of his career, was awesome. And, you saw C.J. Williams get some clutch playing time, the freshman. Kyle Ford was out there a lot. So just all over you were getting contributions from guys that, aren't the headliners like Addison or a Brendan Rice or Mario Williams.
Yeah, if you're like a defender and you're like, okay, that guy doesn't have a career catch, and like, oh, he just caught a touchdown on us. Like you're not probably going to cover him as hard as an Addison. And Jack mentioned it. Yes, we don't have an update on Lincoln Riley was asked about Jordan Addison and Eric Gentry. Both came back to the game, came back to the field in street clothes, both with noticeable limps. So we'll have to get an update probably on Tuesday, maybe during Trojans Live. If they do one on Monday, I assume they will. Maybe Lincoln Riley will give an update then. He hasn't been giving updates on injuries, I think, during that, but those are two big ones because Eric Gentry was your leading tackler. He forced the fumble, the only turnover of the game. I think he had 9 tackles in the game, and Addison was your leading receiver. One of the best players on the team. Both of those guys, their contributions will be missed if they're going to miss any time. The UFC goes to the bye week. Maybe they're minor injuries and they'll be able to come back. We'll have to wait and see. But those are two key spots that you don't want to lose somebody, especially I think at the linebacker spot because we just haven't seen anyone step up and not be. We've seen liabilities at that line, from some of the play of the linebackers. But Eric Gentry's been one of those guys that's just like he's steady. You lose your one steady linebacker that you could count on. I think that could be a real problem for this defense that just gave up 1 million yards to Utah.
And it's not an official injury update, but I did ask Nick Figueroa about, seeing kind of their emotional leader go down and kind of, still do everything he could to go out there and kind of pump them up. The clip that's on social media of him like limping, jogging out to fire, hobbling out there. And he kind of made it seem like Gentry would be fine. Obviously that's not an injury update from him, but he kind of made it sound like Gentry would be okay, that he'd be fine. So we'll see how that plays out. But just so much heart from the Angry Giraffe.
Yeah, number 18.
Number 18.
And you need him out there.
Yep.
And we've talked about the beginning of the game. We've talked about the middle, some of the other big key points. Let's get to the end of the game because you got to give a lot of credit to Utah, not only for getting the ball, driving down the field with a chance to score and tie the game, but Kyle Whittingham wanted to go for the win. He wanted to do so. I think it was all the way back in 2019 as well in the Coliseum. That one worked out for the Trojans. This one, not so much. Cam Rising scores on a rushing touchdown on 4th down, then also scores on the rushing 2-point conversion to put Utah up by 1. It's kind of that point where you're like, the USC's defense needs a big play here. Fourth down he scores, and then he's going to the goal line. USC misses a couple tackles, and Cam Rising's in. And after that, there was a lot of chaos that ensued, but it would have been very hard for USC to go down and score. Some decisions baked into there with timeout. So what were your guys' thoughts about just the end of the game and how Utah won it?
Yeah, Chris is on the field for the whole game. I came down for the last 5 minutes, so I was there watching Utah. And, at that point, Utah wasn't getting stopped. Like, we knew. But USC's up by a touchdown. You had the Michael Jackson touchdown catch that was big on 3rd and 8, so they weren't going to get if USC kicks a field goal, you can lose it with a touchdown. But you score a touchdown, and all Utah could do is tie it, or like they could go for 2. But there was enough time. USC had their timeouts, and it was going to be hard for Utah to take all the time off the clock. So once Utah get to 1st and goal, I thought they should start calling timeouts. Like, this isn't hindsight. This isn't. And I get you're like, well, if you stop them and then you don't have any timeouts, you might have to punt or whatever. Like, USC's offense was the best thing on the field. You would rather get the ball into the offensive hands. So Lincoln Riley was asked about the timeouts and said it was a kind of a 50-50 call, I believe. He said something like that.
Right on the edge.
Right on the edge. To me, it was. I mean, he's way smarter than me about football. Being on the field, the feel I had from the game, watching the press box, being on the field, there was no way I wouldn't have called timeouts and given Caleb Williams time. Like, the worst you could do, and I brought this up on Twitter as well, that say USC does call timeouts, and then when Utah scores, you have more than a minute left instead of 30 seconds or 40 seconds or whatever it was. You got a minute and a half or a minute 20. Does Kyle Whittingham go for 2? Now, a lot of people were saying, oh, he'd definitely go for 2. He'd go for 2. But when you have that much time left, now USC is going to have to score. So if you get 2, USC has to score. So say it's 4th and 10 from USC's 25, USC would punt if it was tied. But now USC is going to go for it every time. Like, you've forced USC's hand. Do you want to do that? Do you want to give this USC offense that much time and always going to be free to go 4 downs because there's nothing to lose? So I think there's a chance that Whittingham wouldn't have gone for 2 if there was more time left on the clock. This is not hindsight. This is what I thought when I was on the field. I can't remember the reporter I was talking to. I'm like, they should be calling timeouts. We're both like, they should be calling timeouts. I think most of the people that were on the sidelines kind of felt the same way. It's a crazy game. The environment's nuts. And, I think not just because of the results. I think if Lincoln Riley had to do it again, he would probably call the timeouts. But he had some confidence that USC could get a stop when all of us that had been watching the whole second half was like, there's no way they're going to get a stop. So that's just my thoughts. But,
But you didn't even feel like a twinge of them being able to do it because we've seen them do it. They held it a 4th and 1 on that incredible tackle by Tuasivi Nomura.
That was I filmed that with my camera. It was my phone. Yeah.
There was a twinge for me, like maybe they'll do it. Maybe they'll be.
That just took more time. That was like the worst thing that could have happened. It just took more time.
Yeah,
for
I understand, but it's like football. It's crazy things happen. And he said he went with his gut. And USC, not USC, but head football coaches are weird creatures, and they're creatures of like they have this confidence and borderline arrogance at sometimes. I'm not saying that was arrogance on his part. I'm just saying like they have their beliefs and they stick to them at times. So if that was his belief, that's what he went with. Should have called the timeouts probably, but I can't sit here and act like I've been in the situation where I have 50,000 people screaming at me, and you have to decide all these decisions on the spot. So
the largest crowd in Rice-Eccles history. So that was another thing that you're sort of going against. And you don't want to be like, people are nitpicking like, oh, you should have done this, should have done that. Like if you said, well, they should have done this more, like would you have had as much success as you did? Like you're making decisions along the way. This was just a clock management decision at the end of the game. The way the game was flowing, I instantly felt you should be calling timeout. Why aren't they calling timeout? Why are they waiting? And it was, they had confidence in the defense making a stop, and they didn't.
Cowboys scored. Sorry.
Are you a Cowboys fan?
Yeah.
Nice.
And just to say, they don't get that holding call on the kick return. Plenty of time, Ryan.
I don't like. Okay, USC did a really good job on special teams in the Washington State game. It kind of got back to penalties, returning. Like Rayleigh Brown returned a ball in the end zone where he sort of. It was like the slow mesh. He sort of was like thinking about it and then returning. He only got to like the 15 or something. Like it was one of those things that you get it to 5 or 6 and you want to return it, fine. If it's in the end zone, just down it. You have not shown. They had one good return, but there was too many negative ones. And in a game that everything was close, you couldn't afford to have those negative plays in the special teams. And there was a big one at the end.
But then he made the play. He made the play.
It was a penalty. Like you didn't make the play. Like that's. The special teams were plumbing it. Someone was complaining about the kick, punting. I'm like, Sleep Dalton did a really nice job. He did that 150-something yarder. He had a 49-yarder
twice.
Yeah, he had a 49-yarder with no return, and then one was over 50 that looked like there was a block in the back or something on, or I don't know, but it was a big return for Utah. But yeah, I don't think the punting was a problem. They did have a problem covering one of those punts. It was a deep kick, but you can't. The kickoff return thing is still a problem. Like if you got, last week they were returning them and they were getting out past 25. That one where you hesitated in your own end zone, like you cannot do that. Like that, I would have been like, you're not returning kicks anymore. Like I'm sorry, like that you can't think about it in the end zone and then return it. You only get it out to like the 15. That was just they're not blocking well enough. You can't do something like that, and you really are putting the offense in a hole.
Well, they ended up blocking a little bit too well, but
yeah.
I was with you the other day where you were talking about just let everything go for a touchback. But then again, they did show some explosiveness in the returns, and Raleigh Brown did have that good one. You think back to the USC-UCLA game just a couple years ago where I remember watching them kick to Gary Bryant, and I'm like, he should not return this right now. And he ends up returning it like all the way into UCLA territory, and USC wins the game late. So I get it. At the same time, you're wasting a lot of clock. Well, that was the problem with me for the Raleigh Brown one. Is like,
yes,
you wasted 10 seconds. That could be 2 offensive plays with Caleb Williams and Mario Williams. And you ended up seeing that at the end that maybe if they had a little bit more time, they wouldn't need to go all out on that one play. But there's a lot of things that went into the end of the game. At the end of the day, USC lost by 1 point on the road. It is a tough loss, and there's a lot of things I think that if USC could go back and redo, they would. But at the same time, the defense didn't play quite well enough for a win. The offense played very well, but just wasn't enough in a tough road environment. So USC 6-1, as we mentioned before. I think that any USC fan, player, or coach, if you told them they were going to be 6-1 going into the bye, I think they'd think that's on the good side of the spectrum.
For sure.
I realize my argument doesn't make sense because it wasn't official, but he got past midfield. That's what I'm saying. He got a 48-yard return.
Yeah, but
I don't think he got all the way to midfield, really.
48 yards. freshman made the biggest play. We'd be talking about that if they didn't have the hold. And even if the hold happens, he gets 45 yards, especially the extra whatever yards he got out of that. We'd be talking about Raleek Brown being a ballsy play.
Yeah.
And
I think it's too risky because you are.
Look, I see it your way too. But I'm just saying he made the play.
Just the time alone. Like I'd rather have Caleb Williams with the ball in his hand than a guy.
That's fair. Yeah.
Ken was saying hindsight is you know what. Like we said it wasn't hindsight. We're not saying this afterwards. We were saying it as this was happening. Like you should be calling timeout. So. That wasn't hindsight, Ken. Sorry.
And you think an offensive-minded head coach, while it is a vote of confidence for Alex Grinch's defense to not call timeouts when they're on the goal line, you'd think an offensive coach would think, if I call the timeouts now and our defense stops them, I'm confident in Caleb and the offensive line and Travis Dye to get 10 yards and ice the game. Or I'm
100%.
confident, maybe they're not confident in Andy Sleep Dalton punting out of the end zone for the first time with the game on the line in Salt Lake City, but you would think that he would be confident enough to gain those 10 yards even if they're at the 1 yard line, and if you get the punt off, I mean, the game's pretty much over because Utah would still need to come back and score a touchdown using all their timeouts most likely. So that's one where, yes, they didn't cover Dalton Kincaid. That's something they could have done, but Dalton Kincaid being a great player, USC should have been calling timeouts at the end.
I always look at this what would your opponent want? Like sometimes people do things, you're trying to outsmart things. You're like, and you're actually doing what your opponent would prefer. Like if you're like, hey, what would Kyle Whittingham want? He's like, well, I'd rather them not use their timeout, so their offense doesn't have a lot of time. Like he wouldn't have liked if USC called timeouts, and USC sort of accommodated what the opponent, the opposing coach wanted. So when you're doing that, when you're doing what your opponent wants, that's when I would question it.
All right, we've got some questions that we can get to.
Let's get some questions.
Let's start with it. We've got 3 calls. I guess we can go to calls first and then questions.
Okay, yeah.
We'll go from Dave from Iowa. Hi, Dave. You're on Tunnel Vision.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry, just want to say I didn't. I've been listening to the show. I went to a party, so I haven't been really listening to the show. But I got 2 questions for you. One, all right. We gave up 4 sacks, and we didn't get any sacks. So clearly, line of scrimmage is a big issue. One, here's an observation. I find it pretty interesting that out of all the Oklahoma players, no offensive lineman or defensive lineman transferred to USC. Doesn't that say something about Lincoln Riley and his thought process when talking about the line of scrimmage? And 2, you guys were talking about timeouts. How come Lincoln Riley or Alex Grinch didn't call a timeout after Kincaid made a big play sometime in the second half to just calm the defense down, regroup, and address the situation and go from there? I'm just curious because we lost by 1 point, but there was still 1 timeout. Could have used it at some point, right? What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I don't agree with using a timeout just to calm the defense down the middle. I would have liked it to stop the clock to give the offense more time. You ended the game with an extra timeout. You certainly could have used that and preserved some time. And I don't think it means anything if a certain position group didn't transfer. He got 3 transfers from Oklahoma. It wasn't.
And they retained their offensive line coach.
Yeah.
Who we thought was going to join him.
Yeah, if Bill Bedenbaugh came over, then you might get somebody else.
And I believe his initial defensive line coach, Kane, was that his name?
Yeah, he was going to, and they ended up at LSU, I think. Yeah.
For more
so you
money.
didn't get a position coach from either one of those groups,
And you had 4 offensive line starters returning at USC.
So there's some of that. So yeah, I wouldn't be. This is an indication of Lincoln Riley because he didn't get a certain transfer. They've done really well in the transfer market, so I wouldn't be critical there.
Also,
right.
What party is he at on a Sunday?
Yeah, happy party time.
Sunday night football party, I guess. Watching your Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
All right, we've got another call from Alan in St. Louis. Hi, Alan. You're on Tunnel Vision.
Hey guys, thanks for taking the call. I know we've been talking about the importance of going to the Big Ten for having more competent officiating, but I also was just thinking about the reaction after the game from national media and how if we were in a better conference or played in a better time slot, that this team could actually have a better chance of potentially playing the championship game or a playoff game. Because, to be honest, it doesn't seem like many people saw, those bad roughing the passer calls. Not a lot of people are going to know that Addison was out for, the most important parts of the game. that we were down 2 starting linebackers. But if you watch the SEC game, like if you're watching the Tennessee versus Alabama game, all I heard all game and even after the game was how Tennessee was out, 3 of their cornerbacks, or all the adversity that they were facing on offense and defense, et cetera, throughout the game. But it's just one of those things where it's just going to end up on a score line, and a bunch of AP voters will just see the end score line and say, oh, USC lost on the road in their first big road test. So, they're pretenders. So just wanted to get your thoughts on what you thought about, moving to another conference would do to mitigate stuff like this in the future. Thanks.
This was a primetime game. This wasn't Pac-12 after dark. It was nationally televised, Fox, and there were great games on Saturday. Most of them were early. What was Clemson, Florida State maybe going up against this one? If you wanted rank versus rank, this was the one you were watching. So
I saw national media tweeting about it, great one on Fox.
Yeah.
Tune in.
So I think this was not a case of that. This was actually a pretty good one, So yeah, I don't know if that would be. USC's still going to get the benefit of the doubt. They can. We talked about what the rest of the season is. I guess there's a scenario where USC wins out and doesn't, go to the Pac-12 championship game. But it seems like pretty far. It's pretty much USC has their destiny in their hands. If they win out, they're mostly 99% they're going to be playing for the Pac-12 championship. In some weird scenario, there might be a situation where that doesn't happen. I haven't checked it for sure, but outside chance of still getting into the college football playoff, which I don't think that should be the goal anyway. It's just one of those things where they're not out of it either. Oregon might be just because they got absolutely curb stomped. But at the end of the year, when you're like, okay, they lost on the road by 1 point on a 2-point conversion, that they led the whole game, you can explain that away. So I think USC, Pac-12, Big Ten, they would get the benefit of the doubt on that anyway. But your resume might be a little bit better if you had the Michigans and Penn States and Ohio States on your resume and you were getting wins there, where Colorado, Stanford, and Arizona, you're not going to get as much credit for those.
I think if you're talking about, maybe not talking about just the Big Ten, but you look in the SEC, Alabama allowed 52 points, Tennessee allowed 49. You're not hearing very much talk from the national media about, is Alabama's defense even good? Do they need to fire their defense coordinator? No, it's this was a great SEC battle. So I think that's kind of where the line will get drawn with USC and the Big Ten. If Michigan-Penn State yesterday was a 43-42 win, I don't think you'd have many people questioning the defenses in that game as they are against USC. And you'd say Michigan won 43-42. The national media would most likely be saying Michigan's offense is such a powerhouse. Look at them get this gutsy performance win, instead of, how did USC allow 43 points to Utah? I think you just get a little bit more respect when you're in the Big Ten or the SEC as opposed to the Pac-12 or even maybe the Big 12.
Hot since 91 on there. So let's talk about this. So he's saying that if UCLA wins this weekend, USC's in trouble. USC still plays UCLA. So are you assuming that USC loses to UCLA? Because if USC beats UCLA, then you have the head-to-head tiebreak, right? So they would have a loss. USC would have one loss. So USC would get in over UCLA. I'm not sure what the argument is there, but I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. But it's just, what's the scenario? Because USC still plays UCLA, they have their own, they can control that because they can beat UCLA. Utah still goes to Eugene and play. So two people are playing. USC doesn't play Oregon, and both UCLA and Utah play in Eugene. So that's tough, I think the scenario would be if Utah beats Oregon and they have one loss and Utah still has one loss and USC has one loss. USC doesn't play Oregon but already lost to Utah, but Utah would also have beaten Oregon. There's some weird kind of scenario like that.
You lost me.
There's a lot. But USC still gets to play UCLA. So if you're assuming that USC loses UCLA, but if you're talking about controlling your own destiny, that means you win. You beat UCLA. They have at least one conference loss. You have one conference loss, and you've beat them head-to-head. So they would not win a tiebreaker in that scenario, unless there was some kind of weird three-way one. And, look at that.
I think if USC wins out and they don't lose another Pac-12 game, you can be pretty confident as a USC fan that they will be in the Pac-12
They'll be in the top
game.
two somewhere.
It will work out differently some ways depending on what Oregon, Utah, and UCLA do. But if you beat UCLA and you don't slip up against Arizona or Colorado or Cal, you're most likely going to the Pac-12 championship game. Let's get into some questions, and I guess this one's kind of right on the money. Andrew had a question. Do you think this team has the resolve to bounce back and win out?
Yes, I do. Based on, I think, the emotion that we saw after this loss and kind of the things they were kind of circling around what they said they talked about in the locker room after this. And, the emotional leaders they have on this team, Eric Gentry, Travis Dye, Caleb Williams, I think they're in a really good position to take the emotional response they've had to this loss, channel it, use it, as Travis Dye said, fuel to the fire for these guys moving forward. It is a weaker schedule, UCLA game notwithstanding, and they could just bully some teams and be refocused and energized and, frankly, a little pissed off moving forward. And I believe Lincoln Riley has gone through this before at Oklahoma, where he's had multiple teams start out undefeated, take a close loss, and then run the table at the end and win the Big 12 championship. So Lincoln Riley knows the blueprint. Excuse me. He's done it before. He has a lot of good leaders on this team, and I think they're really going to use this 1-point loss, into the back half, and as Travis Dye, fuel to the fire. And I'm confident they can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're getting a lot of games at home. You're getting a road game against UCLA, which for USC is basically a home game. You get Notre Dame at home. You're going to
Arizona.
Arizona. Is that the last road trip on the schedule?
Yeah, UCLA will be a neutral site
much,
at worst. So, their next game after the bye will be at Arizona, which is a little bit feisty, but still would expect them to roll in that one.
All right, I've got another question from YouTube. Was Corey Foreman benched again? And I'll group this with a couple of questions because we saw an interesting change in some of the snaps for certain players. It seemed like Brendan Rice wasn't getting as much run. We saw Corey Foreman go from not playing a couple weeks ago to playing last week to, it seemed like, again, I don't know the official stats, but no snaps again for Corey Foreman. So I don't know what you guys saw.
I saw him come in.
He had a couple snaps.
Yeah, I saw him come in at least once. I know he did play, but that also could be because, they moved Nick Figueroa to that rush end spot. So that's an extra guy at your rush end with Solomon Byrd. It just looked like Corey Foreman was the odd man out with that rotation because they were using a lot of Nick Figueroa and then Solomon Byrd to supplement him.
Yeah.
All right, we got another question. With this well-timed bye week, what changes do you anticipate on defense?
That's a good question. We saw Colorado change their head coach, and they completely changed their defense. I don't think USC's doing something like that, but they changed their front. There's more of a 4-4 thing. They added a robber position, and they look way better. They were giving up 49 points or 48 points a game in conference, and then they shut down Cal for the most part. So you can see big changes in the bye week. I don't think USC is going to be doing that. The level of competition is going to go down. I think they're going to be working on tackling quite a bit. That'll be probably the number one thing. But this is sort of a unique scenario. The next thing they're going to have to worry about as far as just explosive offenses like that with mobile quarterback and,
tight ends
and big receiver like Bobo is UCLA. So we'll see kind of what they try to fine tune. But I think tackling is where they're going to look at.
This bye week is where you kind of take the time to self-scout yourself and look at your tendencies and things that, hey, we did this really good in the first half of the season. We sucked at this. We're kind of in the middle here. Let's kind of get it better. So this week will be a big self-scout, especially for the defense. And, I think they need to do a little bit of soul-searching, especially how they cover bigger tight ends, as we saw. They do have some smaller safety players. Jalen Smith's not huge. Max Williams not huge. And they do have some interesting linebacker prospects on the roster. They are banged up at linebacker. Maybe they'll experiment a little bit more, getting those guys some, Chris Thompson. I know a lot of people were clamoring for him. He's a former safety, moved into a linebacker. Rajon Davis, as I mentioned at the top of the show, a guy who has excellent coverage skills and was playing cornerback out in at Mater Dei. So great coverage skills. Maybe they'll try to, move those guys along and maybe get them a part of the rotation in the back half, especially with some weaker teams coming up, get them some more experience for bigger games against, UCLA and possibly whatever happens in the Pac-12 championship, assuming they make it there. So maybe get some more of those speedier, smaller coverage linebackers, some action.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all the questions we've got. We're just coming out about the hour mark. Do you guys have any final thoughts about the USC-Utah game?
Yeah, I would say I know that USC fans are conditioned for everything, the sky is falling, everything's the worst. This is going to be terrible because of
Well, the season's over, man.
the season's over.
Yeah, let's just wrap it up.
Fire Lincoln Riley. We saw the one person that was like Clay Helton was better than Lincoln Riley. Like there were some really dumb takes.
Clay Helton did beat a ranked team this week.
All right, Jack. Settle
Yeah,
down.
that's-
Settle
I'm
down.
kidding.
Settle
I can't. This is going to be a really fun. I got to do my orbiting your exes feature this week because you got
Jackson Dart.
Brew McCoy
Yeah.
having a huge game against Alabama.
Chase McGrath.
How did that kick? First of all, how did he kick it like that, and how did it go in?
beating Alabama on his leg at the end. I remember I was spoken a class at USC, like one of Jeff Fellinger's class, and he was in there when like USC was terrible. It might have been like the 5-7 season or something, and all the students were asking me questions about like how terrible everybody is and all this stuff. And you felt bad because there was a couple players in the class. Chase McGrath was one of them. I think it was when he was hurt too, so he was like on crutches or something, and we
after
talked
the
afterwards.
Texas game?
After that Texas
Yeah,
game.
So kudos for him. He's a great kid. You're happy for him. Clay Helton, I know not a lot of people like him, but him to get a win over a ranked opponent, beat Nebraska, beat a ranked team. They've lost to some bad teams too, but so it'll be a fun X's thing. But I think the USC fans are sort of conditioned for this. But when you look at it, you take a step back and look. This is an ideal loss, if there's such a thing as an ideal loss. Like you couldn't have drawn up a loss any better, and you were a 4-8 team last year that is now 6-1 and one of the favorites to go to the Pac-12 championship. This was, when we saw last year Oregon go into Rice-Eccles and get curb stomped, and then you're like, well, maybe it's different when they play in Las Vegas because there was a huge crowd, Utah crowd in Las Vegas, and I was at both. I was at that one, and they got curb stomped again. This was USC going into the Hornets' nest where everybody loses and should have won and was really close to doing it. If you were going to play Utah tomorrow in Las Vegas, USC's a favorite, like instantly, So this is not a terrible scenario for USC as far as the loss stuff goes. So I would just say this is going to be a fun season. It's been fun so far. You've won 6 games. You got some easy wins coming up, a couple tough, rivalry games. You're probably going to be able to get a win against Notre Dame that doesn't look very good. They're struggling. Like anytime you can beat Notre Dame, that's good. Even if you lose to UCLA and you go at 10-2 is like pretty darn good if you get a win over over Notre Dame, and you have a decent shot at going like 11-1 and winning out. So I would just enjoy it. Like, yeah, okay, it sucks to lose, whatever. But at the end of the day, this is kind of what you want. You wanted this team to be nationally relevant. You wanted them to be competitive. It'll be fun. This is watching Caleb Williams do his thing. If you're not having fun doing that, holy cow, some of the stuff he's doing is just absolutely mesmerizing. Enjoy it. Enjoy your time here. It's a bye week. Kind of sit back and go, all right, coming into it, get some beatdowns on some Colorados and some Cals and go forward, have the rivalry games, and then let the chips fall where they may. If you're so worried about every tiebreaker scenario of these, don't worry about that stuff. Enjoy this season. It's going to be fun. We only get 12 of these a year, right? We only get 12 of these games. Have some fun with it because it's much more fun to watch this team than any team you've seen in the past several years.
Me personally?
All of it.
Oh, the Rose Bowl team.
My little rant there.
Rose Bowl team was kind of fun.
That was fun. Yeah.
That was fun.
But they started off 1-3.
Fair enough.
That wasn't very fun to go to get curb stomped by Alabama.
Yeah, that's the difference. I mean, that USC team didn't make the playoffs, and they had 3 losses, but one of them was a terrible beatdown by Alabama. I'm not going to say USC is going to make the playoff, but if they're in a position, CFP committee is not looking at this season like they did that one where USC didn't lose. What was that one? 52-6, I think it was.
Something like that.
This one was a 1-point loss on the road at Utah.
Yeah.
And that team was scratching at the college football playoff a little bit. If
Yeah.
you remember towards
With
the
3
end.
losses.
Yeah, they were
like,
scratching just at the end after that Washington win.
that was the last road win over a ranked team, Washington. I was up there for that one in Seattle.
Me too.
Yeah.
Fun one.
We weren't on the same team then. We were competitors.
Everything he said, take a step back, take a deep breath. It'll be okay. Season's not over. I think this team is going to be pissed during the back half of the season, which I think is a good thing, and I think it'll be fun. So, yeah, just take a deep breath.
Yeah, that was great. What Riley was talking about is how you respond to a loss. I think the players were as well. We've seen losses completely tank. It's like 2 torpedoes in your side. You're sinking. And we've seen like the Tim Tebow's, like you just bounce back from a loss. Like I'm never gonna, we're never gonna see a team fight like this, like his speech or whatever. I feel like that's what's gonna happen here. It's like this was sort of like
Smelling salts. It's like,
yeah. I thought USC learned a lot from the win over Oregon State. That's why I thought they played well on the road here. I think they can learn a lot from this loss as well going forward. And where you would learn would be when you play UCLA. So we saw improvement off of a win from Oregon State, which I think that's a really good sign. Now you're going to have to see improvement from this when you play UCLA. And if they can do that, I think that's a sign of good coaching, where you're growing from near mistakes like Oregon State and then actual mistakes like Utah.
And it's pressure taken off the shoulders of Lincoln Riley. Pressure taken off the shoulders of Caleb Williams, where you were undefeated. Now you've got a loss, and you can play with there's a lot less to lose when you're already 6-1, as opposed to you're 7-0, then you're 8-0. It's like the undefeated season is still riding. There's a lot of pressure, especially from Caleb Williams. So you can see the emotion where he hates to lose, and now I think he can go out there and rip it. And I think I agree that there's a very good chance USC ends up 11-1. They get a bye, which I don't know what our schedule is going to be on the bye, but it's going to be a week where to just kind of sit back. I think USC fans can take a little mental health break, not yell at the TV for the refs, just not stress about anything, and just take the bye week. And then there's some games on the back half of this schedule where USC can, I think, have a little bit more fun.
Yeah, I got to go back and watch it. I heard a lot of people talk about, like, Brock Hewitt, I guess, was really critical of the officiating.
He said, and I quote, he said multiple things. He said that Tom Brady wouldn't have liked that call. Tom Brady is infamous for getting all of the roughing the passer calls. And he said something along the lines of, I got hit harder than that in junior high school on a roughing the passer call. He was livid.
Wow. Okay. I have to go
get
watch
him on the podcast of champions.
There we go. Yeah, get him as a former Washington quarterback, right? Awesome
that's
stuff. Well, good stuff, everybody. Yeah, thank you. We're probably not going to do a Thursday show just because there's no game to preview. I know we didn't do one the last couple of weeks. I know I've been out of town a lot. Jack's back he's playing injured, but he's got his voice back mostly now, so it's good to hear him back there. I guess we'll have to wait and see for Sunday show. We're not sure what the media availability is yet this week, so we'll find out what that is. If practice schedules are going to be normal, maybe they'll do some different practices. We might have a weekend practice or something. I'm not sure. We don't know what the bye week for Lincoln Riley is going to be like. So we'll kind of, stay tuned to uscfootball.com for all of that. But at worst case, we will have a preview show a week from Thursday. And then, of course, a recap after that. But, yeah, that's it. I really appreciate everyone coming in. There's a lot of people in the chat, a lot of people watching live. So thank you for all of that. And thanks, Chris, for battling this out. Jack fighting through injury. Rub some dirt on those vocal cords. And we're back, baby. We're back. Bye week going forward. They're going to make a run. So be happy, USC fans. You should be.